Hey guys, welcome to another week of the Aaron Running Podcast. As you can see, I'm traveling. I'm in a hotel. We're actually in San Francisco. I came here because my wife actually works for a company in San Francisco. And so I traveled with her this time. And so, but I still wanted to record a podcast. And so I figured for today what I wanted to do was talk a little bit more about my denominational journey. So I've mentioned what denominations or churches I've belonged to in other videos, but it's kind of been scattered in bits and pieces. So I figured I'd just do one video to consolidate all of that. So what I want to start with is the Roman Catholic Church. And for those who have been listening, you've probably heard me mention that I was baptized as an infant in the Roman Catholic Church, but I was never really catechized in it. We never really attended church regularly at the time. I don't really remember going to many services, actually. I think I remember one, but it might have been for a funeral or something. But I am mentioning that because I do believe that the baptism was legitimate. And maybe some of you Protestants might be upset with me about that or disagree with me on that. But I want to read this. So first, it's done in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And I think that is one of the qualifying things for baptism. But the Westminster Confession of Faith in chapter 27 actually says this: the grace which is exhibited in or by the sacraments rightly used is not conferred by any power in them, neither doth the efficacy of a sacrament depend upon the piety or attention of him that doth administer it, but upon the work of the Holy Spirit, and the word of institution, which contains together with a precept authorizing the use thereof a promise of benefits to worthy receivers. So essentially, it doesn't really depend on who is administering the sacrament of baptism or their intention of it, as long as it is done with water and that it is done in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. So I do believe that my baptism as an infant in the Roman Catholic Church was legitimate, and I would say that was my real baptism. I do have plenty of disagreements with the Roman Catholic Church, as you've probably known if you watched any of my other videos. As a Reformed Protestant, I do think there are a lot of issues there. But I will say that my baptism was legitimate, and I would say a lot of the Reformers probably thought that as well. Some of those early Reformers, like Luther, was baptized in the Catholic Church. I believe Calvin was, John Knox was. So I don't think they needed to be rebaptized, and they would argue against that. We'll cover that a little bit later in this video. But next denomination would be Calvary Chapel, and they wouldn't call themselves a denomination. I think it's like a family of churches or whatnot, but Calvary Chapel was formed in 1965 in Costa Mesa, California by Chuck Smith. So immediately after my baptism as an infant in the Roman Catholic Church, I was actually dedicated at a Calvary Chapel in I think it was Calvary Chapel, West Covina, by Pastor Raul Reese. They're now called Golden Springs, which is right there in that area. But I was dedicated the week after, so I got baptized and then I got dedicated, and they are Protestant. They would consider themselves just non-denominational churches. But at one point, when we really started getting a little more serious about church as a family, this was about when I was 9 years old. We started attending regularly at a church that I don't think it was officially a Calvary Chapel. It was called Calvary Christian Fellowship, actually in West Covina. And they had ties to Calvary Chapel, though. And so that was our first church that we were attending as a family. I want to say for almost a year, if not a year. And then after that, we ended up moving. So I was born in the LA area. So yeah, that's why I keep mentioning cities like West Covina and things like that. So I was born in Azusa, which is part of LA County. And so I lived there till I was about, I would say, 10 years old. And so we ended up moving to Central California, which is, 3 hours north from the LA area. And it's to a town called Porterville. And so when we lived there wasn't a Calvary Chapel in the area. So what we did is we started attending a independent Reformed Baptist church. And this church was called Living Word Fellowship. I don't know when they were founded. I couldn't find anything online. And so, but they do, I believe, have connections to John MacArthur's ministry. So I believe their pastor and maybe some of their other elders or leaders have attended Master's Seminary. And so most of the stuff that they teach is going to be Calvinistic, but they do believe only in believers' baptism. They don't believe in infant baptism. And I was actually rebaptized at this church when I was about 12 years old. And now looking back, I don't think I needed to be. And again, this is where we might come into some disagreements, but so there's a verse here. I'm going to pull it up. It's actually a few verses. So this is Ephesians chapter 4, verses 4 through 7. There is one body and one spirit, just as you were called to the one hope that belongs to your call, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is over all and through all and in all. But grace was given to each one of us according to the measure of Christ's gift. So one baptism, right? And this is also going to just help with this too. This is Article 34 of the Belgic Confession. And I'm just going to read it here. I'm not going to read the full thing. I'm just taking part of it. But it says, for this reason, we believe that anyone who aspires to reach eternal life ought to be baptized only once, without ever repeating it. For we cannot be born twice. Yet, this baptism is profitable, not only when the water is on us and when we receive it, but throughout our entire lives. For that reason, we reject the error of the Anabaptists who are not content with a single baptism once received, and also condemn the baptism of the children of believers. We believe our children ought to be baptized and sealed with the sign of the covenant, as little children were circumcised in Israel on the basis of the same promises made to our children. So I'm not going to go too much into history of like the Anabaptists and things like that. But essentially, those early reformers believed in infant baptism, and they believed you only needed to be baptized once. That was a valid baptism. And then a sect around that time, known as the Anabaptist, believed that those were not valid baptisms as an infant, and that you actually needed to be rebaptized, and only if you were a professing believer. So only if you were an adult or someone of age who could make a decision like that could profess your faith, and then you would be baptized. And I don't believe that. I like the language there in the Belgic Confession. You shouldn't be born again twice. You're only born again once, only one baptism. But regardless, I was baptized again there. So now to the next denomination is actually back to Calvary Chapel. So while we were at this church, my dad befriended another guy in the congregation who wanted to plant a Calvary Chapel in Porterville because there was not one. And so we partnered with that guy, and he was the founding pastor of the church, and we planted a Calvary Chapel in Porterville. And this was right around the time that I was in early high school, maybe sophomore year around there. And I think it officially launched by the time I was a senior. Well, we had official launches, but as far as consistent Sunday morning gatherings and things like that. But that whole time was kind of that church planting phase. So we were constantly changing venues and going to evening service to morning service and whatnot. But that church is still there. I think they have moved locations. I think they're more closer to Lindsay now, if you know where that is. Vision Calvary Chapel. I love that church, love the pastor, love just everyone in that congregation very closely. But when I was around, I would say, 18, 19 years old, we had gotten exposed to a new movement of churches, and this was called the Reality Family of Churches. And again, they wouldn't call themselves a denomination. They would call themselves a family or a network of churches. These are all just new words because no one wants to be called a denomination for some reason. These newer churches, but this started in Carpinteria, California, and this was around 2003, I think, when it started, by a pastor named Britt Merrick. And from what I understand, Britt was a Calvary Chapel pastor. I think he was a college pastor or youth pastor or something like that. And I think his ministry, that youth or college ministry, was actually called Reality. And the pastors were you need to go plant your own, and they supported him, sent him out in love kind of thing, which is really cool. And I want to say, I believe they were part of Calvary Chapel for those early years. But there started to be some, some differences. And so a lot of these, and honestly, they started planting churches. And a lot of those pastors that they were planting churches with were actually also former Calvary Chapel pastors. I think mostly youth pastors, associate pastors, and things like that. But they started to get a little more into Calvinist authors and things. They were really into Tim Keller and John Piper, D.A. Carson, John Stott, guys like that. And in Calvary Chapel, as much as I say I love them, they don't vibe with Calvinism. Chuck Smith, their pastor, actually, I think he did the foreword for a book called The Dark Side of Calvinism. I never read it. Yeah, so all that to say is that I don't think they're really big fans of that. At least they weren't at the time. I'm not sure now. So Reality Family of Churches. So I moved to Stockton at this point, Stockton, California. This is more north. It's about, I don't know, if you know where Modesto is, it's about 40 minutes from Modesto, 40 minutes north of Modesto. It's about 45 to an hour south of Sacramento. And so I was a part of the church up there. And I was up there for about 10 years. I spent it was just shy. It was 9.5 years or something like that up there. And I was serving at the church in various capacities up there. Youth ministry, small group ministry, just normal Sunday service type stuff, ushering. And then I got brought on staff at one point, and I was up there as a staff member for about 6 of those years, and was more in an administrative role, and then became a deacon. And so, and then honestly at this point too, they were kind of getting closely tied to with some of the other churches in the Acts 29 world. We would go to Acts 29 conferences and things like that. Never officially part of Acts 29, but just kind of fraternal, I think is the best word for it. Again, this is where I got introduced to Calvinist doctrines. This is where I learned about Calvinism, and honestly, I would say this is where I started to be more of a Calvinist when I was a part of this ministry. But the church at the time, I think, started to, and this was around 2000, I don't know, 17, 18, around there. I think started getting into a little some stuff that I disagreed with, specifically with egalitarianism. If you know what that is, it's more about trying to get more women in ministry. They never had, at least at that time, didn't have women pastors, but they did have women deacons, and we're really pushing for that. And also started to get mixed up in some of the more woke stuff. So some of the more BLM type things and social justice type stuff. And to be fair, I was honestly more convinced of that kind of stuff too when I was there. Although I did have a little check in my gut or spirit about some of these things too. I was still conservative politically on some of these, where I was listening to like Ben Shapiro at the time and stuff. And so a lot of these things kind of rubbed me the wrong way, but I would still say I was more leaning towards that type stuff. But after applying for like the elder candidacy program there, and just a lot of like drama, there was just a lot of stuff that I was just like, I don't know. I would say I was essentially like pushed out of that. And I don't know, maybe some of the people that are, if they even watch this or listen to this, might disagree with that. I mean, I don't know what to say, but like, essentially I was told I wasn't going to be an elder candidate there, and then I got told to step down from being a deacon, which, to be fair, I was never really felt called to be a deacon. I did it because they wanted me to. I always felt called to like elder or like pastoral ministry. But then they told me to step down from being a deacon, and then like a month or two later I was let go from my position. They said it was eliminated. So at that point, that's when we decided to move to Visalia, California. So this is back down towards like the South Central Valley near Porterville. It's like an hour, it's about 45 minutes outside of Fresno, like 45 minutes south of Fresno, if you know where that is. This is where my parents were living. We had kids at this time. I was already married, 2 kids. And so we wanted our kids to grow up around their grandparents and kind of just like a fresh start, And so we moved here, and the first church that we attended while here was called Radiant. And they are part of the New Frontiers or the Confluence family of churches. So that's like the denomination. Again, they don't call themselves a denomination. So it's like a network. But great church. They were more on the like charismatic side. We started attending there because my parents were attending there at one point. My grandma was attending there. When we had like visited in the past, we attended church with them, so we were just very familiar with it. But New Frontiers was founded like in the 1950s or 1960s by Terry Virgo, if you know who that is. He's like the founding pastor in the UK. And so they are more charismatic, but I would say they also lean a little more towards like the Calvinistic doctrine. So I don't think they would claim to be Calvinist. They don't hold to like all the 5 points of tulip or anything like that, but very leaning towards that way. Like John Piper, I think, has said good stuff about like Terry Virgo and vice versa. And so this is where we like found a home. This is honestly though this was like 2019 when we moved there, so right before the whole COVID stuff. And so we were only attending like their Sunday services for like a little bit, and then they stopped doing Sunday services, which most churches in the time did, especially in California. And so we did like the whole church at home kind of thing. Although they did have like small groups that we did attend for a little bit, like in someone's backyard or like outside, which was cool. But we were there for like 4 years and really enjoyed it. Even after, they got back to like doing Sunday gatherings pretty regularly, made some good friendships there, was helping to lead like a Bible study there on Friday nights for men. But during this time, I really started like reading and digging into like Reformed theology. Like I said, I was already a Calvinist, but to be like Reformed, like what Calvin was, or John Knox was, these guys also believed in like covenant theology, and this includes like infant baptism. And so a lot of Calvinists, like a John MacArthur type or John Piper, those are more like Reformed Baptists because they only believe, they're Calvinists, but they believe only in believers' baptism. So I had become convinced after years and years and years of, honestly, kind of a funny story. I think I shared it in another video, but one of my friends had become convinced of infant baptism, and I was like arguing with them, and then like, I don't know, 5-6 years later, I had to text him and be like, dude, I was dumb back then. Sorry. This is now where I've come to believe in that. And so we wanted to start looking for a church that practiced infant baptism that was more Reformed and believed in covenant theology. And so did our research in the area because New Frontiers, they're, Baptist in a sense because they only believe in believers' baptism. And so we started looking in the area, and there was some churches, and it's a new denomination, and this is the next one, called the Alliance of Reformed Churches. And so they're pretty new, started like in 2021, and they come from the Reformed Church of America, which is like one of the oldest denominations, if not, I think maybe the oldest in the U.S. Reformed Church in America is a Dutch Reformed denomination, but they started to have a little more of like a liberal drift in getting progressive in their theology, and so Alliance of Reformed Churches pulled away from them and said, we're going to do our own denomination that's going to be a little more conservative, I guess. And so we found a church in the area that we liked at the time and started going there. And these churches are Dutch Reformed, so they hold to Reformed confessions known as the three forms of unity. So this is the Belgic Confession, which I read from earlier in the video, the Heidelberg Catechism, and the Canons of Dort. And they also hold to like a fourth one that doesn't need to be there. It's called like the Belhar Confession. I didn't know about this until, after being there for a little bit. But I would say we were at a church that was in that denomination, but they didn't seem very reformed. That we started to find this out. So after being there for a bit, more contemporary in their music, kind of like the worship rock band. No really hymns, the pastor. Although they did do infant baptism, he was more of like a Baptist. He wanted more believers' baptism, and even gave a little bit of pushback when I wanted to have our son baptized, who was like at the time, I don't know, 5, I think, or 4. We did get our daughter baptized there though, and she was at the time 7, I think. There were just some issues there where I think they started to, unfortunately, follow in the footsteps of their parent church, the Reformed Church of America, the RCA. And so they started, at least with this specific congregation, but from overall, they are egalitarian. They do women pastors there, which I don't agree with. And so, and then the church that we were at, they had a couple things where like the pastor said there was like a gay couple there that was married and he didn't know if they should get divorced, which I was just honestly like, I don't know how you can be a professing Christian and say something like that. And after we talked about it, I said, I think they think they're Christians. They're not just here, to like, they're not like seeking God. I think they already think that they are Christians because I stood behind them in line to take communion. And his response was, well, we don't do closed communion here. Anybody can take it apparently. And so I was just like, okay, that's kind of like the final straw for us. So we took a weekend to like, hey, we're not going to go, and started looking at other churches in the area. And I was kind of bummed because I'm kind of tired of like, at this point, like looking for a church home, and then I got a call actually from one of the other guys in the denomination, and I would consider him a friend. And if you're watching this, you know who you are. I'm not going to mention names or anything, but I love you, dude. But he gave me a call, and he's one of the pastor of one of the other churches in the denomination, and he said there was a church in Modesto, which is close to where Stockton is. It's where honestly my wife is originally from. That's where she like grew up and everything. And he said there's a church there that needs a lead pastor, and they need to be like revitalized. And so we visited that church like that weekend that I got the call. And it's a small little church. And so, he put the offer out there, and he told me I basically just needed to take this test to see if I could be ordained in the denomination, which I went to the link and it said something like men and women to be ordained, and I was just like, I can't do this egalitarian stuff, especially with like some of the LGBT stuff I was experiencing at that other church, and I was just like within the denomination, and so I told him that I had to decline. And this really like jacked me up. Like I was pretty sad about this because if you know me, I've been pursuing pastoral ministry now for a while. I believe that's what I'm called to. And so this just seemed like a good opportunity, like a lead pastor position in Modesto. And so after honestly a couple of weeks of like being beat up about it, I actually called the dude and asked him if it was still available. And He told me, unfortunately, it had been filled by that point. But I think that was God kind of protecting me, to be honest. And so I'm glad that God is telling me no and not letting me do things that I probably would have regret and move my family to another city, and maybe it wouldn't have worked out or whatever. But so we officially left that denomination, and then we started looking around. So in our area, I already known I wanted to be a part of like a Reformed church or a Presbyterian church. And in Visalia, there's not really a good Presbyterian church. And so the only one here is a PCUSA, which is pretty progressive. And so, so we looked around. We visited a church called Trinity, and it's part of the United Reformed Churches in North America. And then we visited a Christian Reformed church, part of the CRC denomination. And we decided to go with the United Reformed Church. And so the reason was because I looked up the CRC's website, and they seem to be a little more on the liberal side too. Although I think not as liberal as the other ones that we were just at. And so URC seemed to be the most orthodox in their teachings and the most like conservative. And so we started attending there, and honestly fell in love with it. More of a just traditional Reformed church. Liturgy is just beautiful, psalm singing and hymns, no worship band. Preaching is excellent. I mean, and they actually like hold to the Reformed confessions, the 3 forms of unity. And they, aren't ashamed of infant baptism. I mean, that's what they practice, And so the URC, or the United Reformed Churches, they were founded in 1996. And so they are also Dutch Reformed. So their roots go back to like the 16th and 17th century in Belgium and the Netherlands. They were originally part of the CRC, or the Christian Reformed Churches that I mentioned just a little bit ago. But they broke away after some liberal drift. But I believe they are still like fraternal with them too. And so, And so URC is a part of, they're also a part of NAPARC, which if you know what that is, it's like a council. So their denomination itself, and they're not afraid to or ashamed to call it a denomination, is United Reformed Churches in North America, or URC-NA. But they also have a council that they're a part of called NAPARC. And these are churches and other denominations that they're fraternal with and do ministry with. And it stands for North American Presbyterian and Reformed Churches. And so this includes like the OPC, the Orthodox Presbyterian Church. This includes the PCA, Presbyterian Church of America. And there's a couple other ones I forget, but URC is also included in that. And so that's where we've landed. That's where we've been. We're in the process of becoming members there. I think we just finished up our classes, so we're pretty close to the finish line on that. And we've been at this church now, I would say, about 10 months. And I don't really see us leaving unless God calls us to plant a church or something someday, or to move elsewhere, And so that is my denominational journey. And so if there is, any questions, or if you want to share like any parts of your denominational journey in the comments, please let me know. But yeah, I just want to get this out there. It's just like a video to just kind of like recap all of it and reasons why we moved around. And you might say that like, man, you guys like hopped around a lot. I don't know. I guess that's a fair criticism, but this is where the Lord has been taking us, and He's gracious, and I think He's placed us in a good church home right now, and good denominational home. And my wife and kids have been loving it. So I'm just trying to do my best to lead well as, husband and dad. So So again, and if you're not subscribed to the channel, please subscribe. And if you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. It really just helps with the algorithm and trying to grow this channel and get videos out there. All right, thanks for watching or listening. God bless.